Now, usually on a Friday afternoon, we'd be looking forward to the Premier League games for the weekend, but all football has now been suspended. In Ireland yesterday, England today, and as well in the last few minutes, Scotland have called off all their fixtures at all levels as well. It follows many of the major European leagues taking a suspension until early April, and we know that the Champions League and the Europa League games for next week won't be played as well after the outbreak of COVID-19. The Premier League seemed quite insistent last night that the games would go ahead until the news broke that Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, had contracted COVID-19. And since then, we've learned that the Chelsea winger, Callum Hudson-Odoi, has also picked up the coronavirus, and many teams are in partial self-isolation at this stage because of members of staff as well. Of very unusual times to look at the situation. We're joined in studio by Enda Coll and on the line by Miguel Delaney from The Independent. And Miguel, very interesting how things played out last night, because initially when the Premier League statement came out at 9:30, they seemed quite determined games were going to go ahead and in front of full stadiums this weekend.
Yeah, it was a remarkable turn of events. I think also raised issues about communication at the top level, and maybe kind of a staggering bloody mindedness about trying to get this season completed because of potential complications. But yeah, because, what was it, 9:30, we had the press release that the Premier League would be continuing as normal, which seemed remarkable at the time. And just 45 minutes later, the announcement that Mikel Arteta had actually contracted the virus. And now that was just the first of 4 different clubs that have a similar situation and are now in self-isolation, which obviously makes the prospect of playing football ludicrous. And I think what's interesting in all this as well, the Premier League just announced that they're suspending the league for 2 weeks and then coming back on the 4th of April, which, to be honest, seems a massive time-buying exercise as much as anything. Because, you're going by government advice over here in the UK, which is what the Premier League were initially doing. They don't expect this virus to peak until, late May, June. So there's no guarantees we're not going to have a situation where we have more and more clubs suffering the same situation that Bournemouth did today, where they suspect a member of their playing staff may have coronavirus, have to test them, and have to go into self-isolation. That could continue to curtail the fixture list. So I think it's a real mess of a situation.
Miguel, publicly the Premier League are saying the games are off for 2 weeks until April, but Dan Rowan from the BBC was tweeting today that privately they have already discussed the probability of this not going ahead at all for the rest of the season. Have you heard anything about that? Yeah,
totally. And I know that I'd heard last night that at least 2 Premier League clubs, possibly more though, but I have it on. I know like 2 at least, were pushing for the season to be annulled altogether. Because the issue is here. Say if you now, say if you're going for Champions League football or you're in a survival race where there's kind of tens of millions at stake in a situation, obviously it's obviously economically stretched, leaving aside the real world consequences of coronavirus, then I suppose clubs are going to look for any sort of out where that saves them such money. So there are huge complications to this. Yeah, and I think they are exploring every single avenue, and certainly some clubs are pushing for annulment. Others, I suppose, once they get it completed, I think the Premier League would prefer to get it completed themselves because it would save an awful lot of trouble.
Yeah, and the Times were reporting last night as well that one of the reasons the Premier League might have been reluctant to call the games off was because there's some sort of punishment clause within the TV deals that they have done with multiple outlets. Could you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I suppose, I think that given what the Premier League has become, there's been a lot of talk, I suppose, about how why hasn't the Premier League acted yet in comparison to other leagues across Europe. But I suppose this is the issue when it's essentially a breakaway competition that is effectively a members' club. And that members' club now is primarily guided by the immense broadcasting contracts that come from it being the most popular league in the world. And that pretty much governs all. And I think that is what has caused a certain, how to put it, a certain patience, I suppose, in the Premier League on how to act next, because of how lucrative all this is. And it's why they've been so overtly, probably more than any other league or any other competition, guided by government advice, because while they're following government advice, it will always give them that out or that argument. And yeah, it's the broadcasting contract, I heard similar, that weigh heavily over all of this.
Miguel, I assume at this stage as well, the Premier League are going to watch very keenly what happens with this UEFA video conference on Tuesday, and indeed all the leagues around Europe, because if Euro 2020 is pushed back by a year, there's a summer and a little bit of time to play with. If Euro 2020 was to proceed, there's no way these seasons get finished.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that was what was putting massive stress in the fixture list, because, I mean, it was actually yesterday it was 3 months until the competition was supposed to start in Rome, which seems incredible at the moment. And it meant that the entire fixture list was compacted. What we wrote yesterday, we'd heard basically that UEFA had already been talking to their outside agencies to get ready for a potential shift. And to be honest, I'm 99.9% certain that on Tuesday they will announce that that Euro 20 becomes Euro 2021, because it will give everyone so much more time, give everyone breathing space. But I suppose what this actually illustrates, as much as anything, and I know it's obviously small in the grand scheme of things compared again to the real world consequences of coronavirus, but it does show as well the massive problem the football fixture list has become. And this is something that was already bubbling as an issue before the coronavirus crisis, and there were all sorts of discussions about what the calendar is going to look like after 2024. But basically, there's no breathing space at all. It's too packed. And it's interesting, we're going to go from a situation where there's literally too much football to now 3-4 weeks where we have to live without it altogether.
Well, you're living in the UK at the moment. Many of us here, when we're in this kind of partial lockdown situation that we're in here in Ireland, were quite surprised after the Cobra meeting yesterday, and indeed all the sporting events that have been allowed to proceed in Britain. If you look at Cheltenham, over 250,000 people attending that. Madrid had a coronavirus outbreak, yet the Atletico Madrid versus Liverpool game went ahead with a full house at Anfield during the week. Up until a few minutes ago, the Old Firm was going to take place. It could have been hundreds of thousands of people at football this weekend across Britain as well. And the rugby is going ahead in Cardiff on Saturday as well. To an extent, we've kind of been shocked here that all these events are going ahead and the British government have just said, plough on. How have the British public been reacting to this?
I actually think, from what I can read, the majority has been surprised that the government has gone so far the other way to the rest of Europe. I've been surprised myself. And I was very sceptical. I have to say, personally, I'm no fan of Boris Johnson, obviously, but I could see the logic in yesterday's press conference. Obviously, came from the chief medical officer more so than the Prime Minister. I mean, and there was at least logic, I suppose, that there has to be a certain normality until they need to enact a lockdown at the real crisis point, maybe in 10 weeks' time. But yeah, I think there has been general scepticism. I think people were surprised there hadn't been a shutdown yet. But and I suppose this is where the kind of logic of the government's position comes in. You would wonder how people start to react after a week, 2 weeks of lockdown, where there's kind of some sort of yearning for normality, which I suppose this is one of the things about even football behind closed doors, that it would have offered some of that normality at very abnormal times.
And football, unusually enough, could possibly have worked behind closed doors just purely because of the financial impact of the TV deal, that realistically clubs in the Premier League, given all the money that comes in, maybe would have been able to ride out a few weeks with no fans at the stadium? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that again, that was why that was initially seen as such a potential option in all this, because it would have ensured TV money would come anyway through the contract, but it would have ensured that a constant stream, that basically the show went on. But one of the potential problems was the possibility of players' unions like the PFA getting agitated about their members having to play in situations where they're essentially putting themselves at risk of contracting the virus.
Well, thanks to Miguel Delaney, Chief Football Writer with The Independent, for bringing us up to speed on the situation. Enda Coll is still here with us. And an important point probably brought up at the end of our conversation there in terms of the players, because Hudson-Odoi has now contracted this. We've heard about players in Serie A like Daniel Rugani during the week as well. I think the former Barcelona, now Bayern Munich midfielder Thiago Alcantara overnight was basically making the players' point that he was very disappointed some Bundesliga games are going ahead this weekend. Yeah, so the DFL confirmed that tomorrow's game against Union Berlin, that's Bayern Munich's game with them, is going to go ahead. And he tweeted saying, the DFL, this is irresponsible and imprudent, this is crazy. Please stop fooling around and land on reality. Let's be honest, there are much more important priorities than any sport. So he's clearly unhappy. The players who are involved in this are clearly unhappy. I know Brendan Rodgers said in his press conference when he was asked about his player, I think 3 Leicester players are now currently being quarantined because they've shown symptoms. So he basically said that, look,
the fact that they're missing for their game that is now not going ahead was not the important part. The important part was that they got okay. So that's where we're landing at the minute. I think the Premier League has made the right decision this weekend to call off the games until at least 2 weeks' time. Whether we see the season finishing out or not is a different story.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm very sceptical that games will be back on the 3rd or 4th of April, because realistically, you've got two people there, definitely with Hudson-Odoi and with Mikel Arteta, who are going to be in quarantine for quite some time as they recover from their illness. We hope they make an absolute full recovery, of course. And then there is the potential that other people could be diagnosed in the period in between now and the 4th of April as well. I find it very unlikely the football will re-kick back in the weekend after that.
Yeah, I highly doubt it. If players have it now, then it really is too much of them to ask these players to continue on. You can't ask a national team that have had to go into quarantine for 2 weeks to play a football match then straight away after. So the likelihood is that we will see this being pushed back, as Miguel is saying, to later on this season. And you know what? That's not the worst decision. If it comes to that, if it comes to this season being finished out at the start of next season, then so be it. That is the priority at this stage. The priority is keeping people safe, making sure people don't contract the virus, spread the virus, and really and truly, while football is a great distraction, it's not the priority here, as Alcantara was saying. Well,
L'Équipe reported yesterday, in all likelihood, this video conference on Tuesday will determine that Euro 2020 won't take place. I'd be shocked if it's any other decision than that.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's going to be in 2021 instead. And like, if we see these tournaments going ahead at a later date, we're still going to see these tournaments going ahead. I think that's the important thing to stress, is that we might not have sport for a while. We might not have it for a couple of weeks, maybe until September again. But I mean, we have survived without sport throughout summer as it is, so we will survive without football as it is as well. So I think if it really is just a matter of the UEFA, the Premier League and the different governing bodies throughout Europe to come to a decision on what form these leagues are going to take. Be that, for example, you mentioned the Bundesliga, they're potentially going to have a 22-team league next year. La Liga might do something different. Premier League might do something different. And it's really just about getting those plans in place for what's going to happen come say, if it goes ahead in April, I don't think it will, but come September, whenever they're going to play these games.
It's a much wider point, Enda. I asked Miguel about it a few minutes ago, just intrigued in your take on it as well. The week it's been for sport in Britain, a lot of major events have gone ahead. Cheltenham, over 250,000 people, packed house, 50-odd thousand at Anfield during the week. The Old Firm would have went ahead up till a few minutes ago. We know the rugby is going ahead with an open roof in Cardiff tomorrow as well. Are you surprised that the British government have seemed at least so lenient about mass gatherings?
Yeah, well, like, I'm not going to be too quick to criticise the governing bodies of the Premier League, of the Scottish League, of Cheltenham as well, because they are using. It's not them making the decision; they are making their decision based on what the British government are relaying to them. And if that's what the British government are relaying to their governing bodies, to the citizens, then it's up to them to make their decision on that. I think from an Irish perspective, it looks a lot worse because we have gone into this lockdown that we're at, and that we've cancelled all sporting activities. It seems that the governing bodies have taken it into their own hands and made this decision. Probably is the right decision. I remember Tom English was on with us during the week, chatting about, I think it was a game in the Scottish League. I can't remember who he said it was between, but the precautions they were taking was if anybody outside the stadium was showing symptoms, they weren't allowed in. So it wasn't really much of don't come to the stadium. It was like, you won't get into the stadium if you're coughing. So
just make sure you don't cough at the turnstile.
Yeah, exactly. So the precautions weren't there during the week. The precautions are going to be there going forward. So it's not for me to criticise the government bodies, but I think they've made the right decision this week.
We preface everything we discuss with, of course, public health is far more important than
100%.
sport. But from an Irish perspective as well, this is potentially a hammer blow to some of the League of Ireland clubs as well, because they're so reliant on people coming through the gates in order to keep the income stream going. And for players, many of whom are part-time, or maybe you rely on a contract for just a few weeks of a season, this is a big blow for the League of Ireland to be suspended until the end of the month as well.
Definitely is. I think we spoke about this with Dan McDonnell on the football show a few weeks ago about how reliant the League of Ireland clubs are on gate receipts. I think one bonus for League of Ireland size is most of their gate receipts come from season ticket holders. For example, Bohemians, they have 90% of their season tickets already sold until the end of the season, so they should be fine it's not so much the clubs over the next month or so. It's if this continues on for 6, 7, 8 months, if the season is completely wiped out, then you're worrying about the smaller clubs in the League of Ireland, like the Finn Harps, Sligo Rovers, Shelbourne, those clubs who don't have
the entire First Division.
The entire First Division could have catastrophic consequences on them. It's more the players that you're worried about than anything. We had Stephen McGuinness on from the PFAI last night on the football show, and he relayed that. He said that players are worried, but they're doing their best to try and ensure people's wages are secured, to make sure the future of the competition is financially secured, first of all. And really and truly, nobody. But he wasn't given any guarantees. He said for the 2 weeks that we're currently on lockdown, that's all they can do. They can't look any further than that. Nobody has a glass ball. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But they're putting plans in place to try and make sure the best protocols go in place so that the financial security of the league is secured.
Well, very interesting times for football in this country and football across Europe as well. We'll all be watching very keenly to see what happens at that UEFA video conference call on Tuesday, where a decision will be made on the rest of the Champions League, Europa League, and perhaps more importantly, the future of Euro 2020, with all expectation now that it will be postponed until next summer. The Premier League, if you're just joining us, postponed until at least April the 4th, and the rest of the English Football League as well. The Scottish Football League and the Scottish Premiership have followed suit in the last hour or so as well, so there will be no Old Firm derby or any games played across Scotland this weekend either. Here in Ireland, we won't have League of Ireland, as Enda has mentioned, on at least the 29th of March, and it will be reviewed at that stage. Our football coverage, of course, here with thanks to Paddy Power on Off the Ball. Check us out on all of our social channels over the next couple of weeks. We're going to have lots of great content to keep you busy if you are away from work, and we will speak to you very soon when we're talking about Premier League again.